Clarke, the final thing we want to do while we're on the topic of the DWI stop itself is interject one other element, which is what if there was a wreck involved? Walk me through that.
Well, wrecks pose a very unique situation in DWIs because typically the police officer who's charged you with DWI never saw you drive. So we'll start by putting this into two general categories: a wreck involving another car with a witness who's going to be in court, or a single car wreck where you simply run off the road into a ditch and there's nobody there that witnessed your driving.
Right.
In the situation where you've hit another car, it's a tragedy. You've potentially got aggravating factors. It's serious and you need to deal with that. And that may be grounds that you want to negotiate some sort of plea agreement. But it may not. Every case is different. But let's talk specifically, and we get a ton of these cases, about single car wrecks.
You hit a lamp post or something?
Exactly. You hit something and you stop and you get out and you go look at your car to see if you've done any damage. And those come through routinely. Now, if you were to simply get back in your car and drive on home, you've committed a crime of leaving the scene of an accident.
Even if there was nobody else involved?
Even if there's nobody else involved, although that's a gray area also. But you'll be charged with failing to report an accident. Now, this is where DWI law gets very complicated, because now we're going to finally talk about Miranda. Everybody loves to talk about your rights. Well, Miranda is your right to remain silent. Well, North Carolina statutes say that if you've been involved in a reportable accident, you've got to stay at the scene and tell them you're the driver and tell them how it happened.
But?
Well, that violates your Fifth Amendment right to remain silent.
Of course.
You're obligated by law to incriminate yourself. Now, I have been arguing for quite a while, and we're still waiting for the right case to come out of the Court of Appeals, that if you stay and report an accident as you're supposed to, there's a public duty doctrine that requires that not be used against you in a courtroom. So a lot of times, you're the only witness against yourself in these single car accidents.
Oh, man.
It's a fascinating area of the law. Separate and apart from that, let's assume that your admission comes in. Yes, I was driving the car. Well, the next fascinating area of the law is an old Latin term called Corpus Delicti, and it means that the body speaks for itself. And so in Corpus Delicti, let's talk about murder for a minute. You've often heard of these great mystery stories where somebody confesses to a murder, but they can't find a body.
And if there's no body, there's no crime.
If there's no body, there's no crime.
Right.
Well, in a DWI situation, especially in single car wrecks, you've confessed to driving a car, but have you confessed to a crime? And that's the issue. If nobody saw you drive, you may still have an old Latin Corpus Delicti argument that they don't have enough evidence to convict you.
Now, one way or the other, if this wreck that we're talking about gets reported, how does that affect your defense strategies?
Wrecks are complex because they require a lot of witnesses, but ultimately you're talking about an element of the crime. If the state can't prove you're driving, they're missing one of the elements of the crime, no matter how impaired you were. So it goes to an element of the crime rather than a suppression motion. So
Right.
that's where we differ, elements versus suppression motions.
Before we leave this topic, you mentioned in passing that the two different sort of categories, and one you said is if somebody is seriously injured. Let's back for a second. Does that make any difference in how this is all handled?
Yes, it can. When you've got injuries in a wreck situation, you may actually have reasons to negotiate some sort of plea agreement. We'll get into greater detail about what are grossly aggravating factors, but if there are grossly aggravating factors in your case, you may choose to negotiate a deal.
Thanks, Clarke. Well, now coming up next, we're going to talk about probable cause to arrest.